Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and I just reached Legend Rank in Season 26 of Pokémon GO Battle League. In today's video, I'm going to be revealing the Open Grade League team that I built that helped me reach Legend Rank and number 6 in the entire world. The team features Volt Switch Fortress as the lead, Furret with Brick Break as the safe switch for better coverage into Corviknight, Fortress, and Guzzlord, and the Sauce Shadow Counter Annihilate as the closer. I noticed so many teams that were ABA weak to fighting, and Shadow Counter Annihilate proved to be the remedy for those teams, as it was an absolutely terrifying closer. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1 we pick up a pretty bad lead Fortress into Shadow Quagsire. For Shadow Quagsire leads, I like to immediately safe switch into Furret, as Furret is usually very strong into these teams. Quagsire chips with the Aqua Tail, they send out Empoleon, and it's highly likely that this is the triple water team that helps Lucky Boy make it to Legend. The good news for me is that Furret is very strong into this team. Brick Break hits for super effective into Empoleon, and now that my Sucker Punches are doing extra damage, they're forced to fire off energy. This is a great opportunity for me to send in the Shadow Counter Annihilate, because I want to be up energy for the Gator that they're going to have in the back. In comes Feraligatr, it's actually the Shadow Feraligatr, and the Shadow Feraligatr is going to be taking some pretty substantial damage from counters. They put up the shield, but now these counters are absolutely shredding. You may notice that I am actually revealing the Shadow Annihilate by these here. That's because I am not running my attack CMP winning Annihilate. Instead, I am running a bulk-weighted Annihilate due to the fact that there aren't really Annihilate mirrors. However, even a high-rank Annihilate can still win charge attack priority over most Feraligatr, so I'm able to force the final shield. And this sets up an endgame where my Volt Switch Fortress is up a shield against their Quagsire. This is normally a pretty bad matchup for the Volt Switch Fortress, but up a shield and up energy, Fortress will actually be able to close out this game. I Sand Tomb first to debuff their defense, they hit back hard with the Stone Edge, but now I can reach for the Rock Tomb. Even though Rock Tomb is resisted, it does do more damage than a Sand Tomb, and damage is what I need here. Rock Tomb is going to land, they fire off a last second Aqua Tail, but they've already taken too much damage. The Volt Switch knocks out, in comes Feraligatr, they get Volt Switch down as well, and that is a good game. We pick up a much better lead in game number 2, leading Volt Switch Fortress into Carbink. The nice thing here is Fortress has such an incredible pacing advantage. I'm able to spam out these Sand Tombs so quickly, and they have to farm up quite a bit of energy if they want to hit back with their Rock Slides. Here, I decided to overfarm because I really didn't want my opponent to tank 2 Sand Tombs and switch. They fire off a Power Gem, much to my surprise, so they're actually not running Rock Slide. I think Rock Slide is just strictly better on Carbink, but I'm pretty happy that they're running a worse move. My opponent safe switches into a Gourgeist, and this is a problem Pokemon for this team. Gourgeist absolutely shreds Annihilate, and it has a very favorable matchup into the Fortress. This team is also pretty soft to Talonflame and basically fire types in general. However, I do still believe that that is an acceptable risk right now, because at least in my ELO range, fire type usage is way down. Talonflame basically feels like a forgotten Pokemon, and Gourgeist isn't very common either. I'm able to get the Brick Break into a full farm down, and my opponent reveals their final Pokemon is Corviknight. And this is a situation where Brick Break on Furret is incredibly nice. Normally, Furret is completely walled off by Corviknight, so Corviknight can kind of use this as a matchup to set up enough energy to sweep an endgame. But they absolutely cannot do that if you have Brick Break. My Brick Breaks did so much damage to the Corviknight, they were so debuffed, they were forced to pivot out back into the Carbink. I'm able to grab a shield with the Rage Fist, and now Shadow Counter Annihilate is going to do what Shadow Counter Annihilate does best. Carbink goes for the Moonblast, praying for a debuff, but it's not going to happen. Back in comes the Corviknight. I am outside of range where an Air Cutter will take the knockout. They go for the Air Cutter. Annihilate survives. And now I get to boost up my counter damage even more. This Rage Fist will be shielded. These counters are shredding. I farm up to the last second, snipe them down with Furret, and emerge with the win. We pick up a terrible lead in game number 3, Fortress into Diggersby. Fortress can't do anything here, so I'm forced to safe switch into the Furret. Diggersby will be able to barely outpace, making the Scorching Sands before I can fire off a Brick Break. Scorching Sands land, they send in Volt Switch Fortress, and so far my opponent is very weak to my Annihilate. If possible, I would love to try and make a play for Switch Advantage, and the only way I'm going to be able to do that is thanks to Brick Break. Brick Break is very cheap to get to, and with its guaranteed defense drops, it makes Steel Counter Swaps a lot easier for Furret. They land a Sand Tomb, I fire off the Brick Break, this is going to be close, and it actually ends in a simultaneous KO. Now I have to predict, will they bring in the Diggersby? I say yes. I send in Annihilate. In the back, they have Carbink, they are triple weak to Shadow Annihilate. Opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. We pick up a tricky lead in the next match, Volt Switch Fortress into Altaria. Technically, Altaria has winning to neutral matchups into this entire team, so beating Altaria is always going to be by committee. If they Sky Attack bait, then they make the Flamethrower before you can get a second Rock Tomb, so I'll go for the Sand Tomb bait to catch back up just for them to call the Sand Tomb bait. What ended up starting as an okay matchup now turns into a disastrous one with that no shield from my opponent. I'm able to get the shield back, save switch into Furret, and my only hope is that most Altaria lead teams do not have a good answer to a Brick Break Furret save switch. Most of the time, their answer to a Furret save switch is Empoleon, and they do send in Empoleon. They don't get the Swift catch, and now I can hit them for big damage with Brick Break. The threat of a Swift taking the knockout is going to force immediate energy from the Empoleon. I could go for the double counter head start on Annihilate, but I think 2 Volt Switches is actually a lot more important. Because now, I'm able to make a Rock Tomb and only 1 more Volt Switch. That's going to force my opponent to fire off energy, and I feel pretty okay letting this go, getting knocked out by the Flamethrower, and instead just taking an advantage on Shadow Annihilate. It's going to be Shadow Annihilate versus Aegislash in the endgame. Shadow Annihilate is up energy, and that should allow me to make 3 Rage Fists before my opponent is able to make it to their second move. Now, they fire off energy immediately. They're going to be switching into the Blade form, trying to take advantage of the quicker energy generation from Psycho Cut. It's going to be close. I have to commit to the farm down, and I do get the farm down. That game could have been tricky if my opponent ended up over-farming more in shield form before switching into Blade form, but luckily they did not, and Annihilate just sweeps another team. We pick up a very bad lead Fortress into Guzzlord in the next game. Another reason why it's really nice to have Brick Break on Furret with this team is Brick Break allows you to win the zeros against Guzzlord. Against Guzzlord as Furret, I'm basically never going to be shielding because the only shielding scenario that you win is the zeros. My opponent pivots out, saving Guzzlord, sending in Corviknight thinking they wall me, but they do not. Brick Break is just too helpful here. My opponent just goes straight for the Air Cutter. They're fishing for a boost. Air Cutter will not take the knockout, but unfortunately they do get the boost. That is really not ideal. I'm now going to have to deal with a boosted Corviknight, but the defense is at -2. Furret reaching for the Swift, and my opponent doesn't get the farm down. They're forced to fire off energy. That is actually very nice. Furret able to hang on, and now I'm able to snipe them down with the Volt Switch. In comes Guzzlord, answered with Annihilate. It's going to be Feraligatr in the back, and Shadow Annihilate is looking in prime position to sweep once again. Annihilate's Rage Fist shielded up by the Feraligatr, but the one thing my opponent cannot shield is the Shadow boosted counters. They fire back with a Hydro Cannon, but every time they fire off a charge attack, that is a free counter sneak over to the Annihilate. Annihilate goes for another Rage Fist. I'm going to have to make a pretty difficult call. When my opponent brings in the Guzzlord, they are 1 off the move. Are they going to throw instantly, or are they going to try and predict the catch? I decide to stay in, predicting that they would predict the catch, and it pays off. I get 3 boosted counters out of the Guzzlord. That's huge damage, and I still have a full health Fortress. I fire off the Sand Tomb immediately. My game plan here is pretty clear. I'm going to be Volt Switching down a Guzzlord. That's not something that's normally very easy to do, but with the power of Sand Tomb, it is possible. We Volt Switch down Guzzlord. All they have left in the back is the low health Feraligatr, and my opponent resigns the match. We pick up a great lead in the next match, Volt Switch Fortress into Florges. My opponent save switches into the ever-scary Shadow Primeape, and I respond with my one and only answer, which is Shadow Annihilate. I did switch fast enough that I'm able to make the Rage Fist before their second Rage Fist, so I fire that off instantly to get the shield back before my opponent forces me to give up my final shield. I'm perfectly okay going down 2 shields in this matchup because Annihilate is the glassy Pokemon on this team, and I exit the matchup at basically full HP. This is going to be an annoying Pokemon for my opponent to remove from the field of play. Even as they bring back in Florges, it's not like Florges can farm down, they're going to be forced to fire off energy. They should go for the Trailblaze here so that way they can boost up their Chilling Waters into the Fortress, and that's exactly what they do. So a pretty nice play from my opponent, understanding that it's just a bad play to throw a Chilling Water there. They want to boost up their damage, and in the back, they have Aegislash. The good news for me is that Furret does not get one-shot by a Gyro Ball. Part of the reason why I feel that this team had a lot of success is because Aegislash is so incredibly common from the 2800 to 3000 elo bracket, and this team across the board has very strong play into Aegislash. This is probably a conservative estimate by me, but I would say that about 50% of teams in that elo range were running Aegislash. It's just so strong that people are just running it again and again and again because this Pokemon is just absolutely cracked. Aegislash fires off back-to-back Gyro Balls, taking the knockout, they pivot out, and they send back in Florges. In this moment, I actually don't want to Rock Tomb right away. Instead, I want to try and exit this matchup with as much energy as I can possibly get, because I'm going to need it against that Aegislash. So I farm up to 100 energy with the Fortress. I'm going to be full charging the Rock Tomb. Rock Tomb will secure the knockout, and now as they bring back in the Aegislash, they are back in shield form. I'm at -1 attack, so I'm really not doing a lot of damage. However, Aegislash's pacing is not very fast in its shield form, so I can fire off the back-to-back Sand Tombs. That gets them to 1 HP, and I just get the farm down before they make the game-winning Shadow Ball. We get the same lead in the next match, leading Voltage Fortress into Florges. The most common occurrence versus a Florges lead that I found was Florges just staying in. A lot of teams leading Fairy types are ABA weak to Voltage Fortress, so they're kind of forced to stay in and play this out. As the Fortress, you end up being very debuffed, but you will be able to exit this matchup with a charge stack loaded. My opponent safe switches at a Primeape, and I wasn't aware that I had seen so many teams that were Florges plus Primeape. This is the non-Shadow Primeape, however, which means I just simply don't have to shield the first Rage Fist. That's a very important distinction. Versus the Shadow, you have to, or you're getting destroyed, but against the non-Shadow, that works out pretty fine. Unfortunately, my Annihilate does get fully farmed down, but look how much damage I just got onto that Florges. That Florges went from very healthy to basically no HP remaining in just a few counters. They're going to fire off another Chilling Water. I'm okay letting this go because I know that I will be able to hang on here, not by much. They pivot, and their final Pokemon is revealed to be Diggersby. I wasn't quite sure what was coming in, so I threw the Rock Tomb as a reflex, but either way, this game is over. As the Diggersby is debuffed, there's just no way out, and they will concede the match. We get a mirror lead in the next game, Fortress into Fortress. If you see the non-Shadow Fortress, it will typically be on Volt Switch. It's the Shadow one that's normally on Bug Bite. My opponent actually doesn't risk the CMP tie, which I really like because I normally lose charge attack priority. I have a very high rank Fortress. So landing that first Rock Tomb means that my opponent now really can't do a lot of damage. They're going to safe switch into Licky Licky, and I'm more than happy to respond with Furret. You don't really want to send Annihilate into Licky Licky just because Licky Licky can threaten Shadow Ball, and as the Shadow Annihilate, Shadow Ball is actually something that you have to worry about. So I'm more than happy just to send in the Furret. Furret's going to have a very dominant matchup here with Brick Break. Now that they're debuffed, they're already almost at a range where I can knock them out with a Swift. Body Slam is going to connect. I throw one more Sucker Punch and the Swift, and this should be knocking out the low HP Licky Licky. Swift connects, Licky Licky does get knocked out, and back in comes the Fortress. And guess what? Fortress is forced to throw a move because Furret would have got there. They fire off the Sand Tomb. Sand Tomb does set up the perfect farm down for them. And now I have to decide, what am I bringing in? I decide to bring in my own Fortress in the back. They have Guzzlord, and unfortunately, this is just a team without a counter resistance. They're double weak to counter in the back. They have a Fortress on the lead. These are the kind of teams that made me want to run Shadow counter Annihilate. As Annihilate fires off the Rage Fist, my opponent knows there's just no way out. They no shield, we counter everything down, and take the win. Picking up a great lead in the next match, leading into a Shadow Empoleon. Now, typically I don't encounter Shadow Empoleon. Is Fortress versus the regular Empoleon, you normally never want to throw your Sand Tomb until it KOs. So, versus the regular Empoleon, I'll just overfarm a bunch, I'll tank a Hydro, shield a Hydro, and only throw the Sand Tomb when it knocks out. And the reason why I do that is because regular Empoleon wins the zeros against Volt Switch Fortress. So if you're going to have to put up a shield anyway, you may as well exit the matchup with a ton of energy. In this matchup, it was the Shadow, so I threw right away, and my opponent punished that with a catch onto Altaria. However, considering how weak I am to Altaria, getting a Sand Tomb debuff onto Altaria actually works out very nicely. I'm able to knock them out with double Swift, they bring back in the Shadow Empoleon, and I'm able to make it to a third Swift. This Swift is resisted, but Shadow Empoleon not known for its bulk. The shield comes up, and now I send in the Shadow Annihilate. The counter goes through. I think they will barely survive that counter, but not by much. In the back, what do you know? It's another Aegislash. And having 3 potential counters to Aegislash on a team is just so nice at this elo bracket, because I'm always going to be able to outpace if they stay in shield form, and if they ever switch over to blade form, then my boosted counters, even though they're single resisted, should be enough to just fully farm them down. So they go for the Shadow Ball. I'm just going to commit to the fast move pressure, and Aegislash will get farmed down, and that is going to be the game. We move to the next match, leading Fortress into Shadow Altaria. I found that I had a lot more success going for Sand Tomb baits versus the Shadow Altaria, just because Shadow Altaria kind of gets destroyed by Rock Tomb. They can survive it, but if they end up no-shielding it in the 2s, then I believe you can end up Volt Switching down after, so it feels like a pretty safe Sand Tomb bait. The Sand Tomb bait is successful, and my opponent is going to pivot out and send in Feraligatr. But Feraligatr is very far behind. I'm very happy just to stay in here, fire off the Rock Tomb, and then just look to farm up as much energy as I possibly can with the Fortress. My opponent should be able to make another Hydro Cannon here, and unfortunately, that does mean that I will be losing charge attack priority. However, I'm pretty okay with sacrificing the fortress if it means I can get up energy on Furret, because again, I'm trusting in the fact that Brick Break Furret is always very strong into Altaria teams. The Shadow Altaria is going to hit the field, and this is exactly where I want to see it. I get to launch Swift, and Swift does a lot of damage into the Shadow Altaria. And because Furret is so bulky, even though Shadow Sky Attack hits hard, I will be able to hang on. So, I'm able to survive. Now I can look to overfarm. My opponent makes a very nice catch, saving the Altaria and catching the Swift onto their Empoleon. Unfortunately, it's bad news for Empoleon as in comes the Shadow Annihilate. Here, I'm going to make a bit of a weird play. Instead of farming down, I actually fire off the Rage Fist here. This is because I want to boost up my counters before Altaria hits the field. I want to get as much damage onto the Altaria as I possibly can, and it ends up paying off as we counter them down and take the game. Picking up a very nice lead in the next match, Volt Switch Fortress into Togekiss. Now normally I wouldn't shield in a scenario like this, but this team is very weak to Togekiss in the back, so protecting the Fortress because it's the only answer to Togekiss does usually end up being very, very important. My opponent safe switches into Quagsire, and I'm going to be responding with the Furret. Now, Furret without Trailblaze doesn't have the most convincing Quagsire matchup, especially if they're on Mud Bomb, and this Quagsire is. Mud Bomb does a lot of damage neutrally. My opponent ends up putting up the shield. I make it to another Swift. They know that they can survive this, but if they really want to prioritize Switch, then they're going to double shield. The fact that my opponent is double shielded honestly works out pretty nicely for me, because this now means they have no ability to stop their Togekiss from getting Ice Punched. So I just send in Annihilate, and I have to decide, am I going to be shielding? I say no. That Aqua Tail does quite a lot of damage. They have another Aqua Tail locked and loaded, and that is going to force the final Protect Shield. However, if I get the full counter down, that means I'm only one away from the Ice Punch. So when they bring in Togekiss, I'm only going to have to take one Peck's worth of damage. So I fire off the Ice Punch. This should be taking the knockout onto the Togekiss, and in the back, that's not an Empoleon, but it's going to be the ever-present Aegislash. Aegislash will need to form change to take the knockout, and I'm pretty sure that I have energy stored on my Fortress. So I get to farm up a ton of energy. I actually here make a bit of a throw. I predicted they would throw right before I made it to my Rage Fist, but they just never did, and I end up switching, and that kind of makes life a little bit uncomfortable. But I assumed that they would just never let me get to the Rage Fist, but as it turns out, they would have let me get to that Rage Fist, and suddenly the path might not be so clear if the Shadow Ball knocks out. I have to hope that my rank 12 Fortress can hold on. Shadow Ball is going to connect. Fortress survives. I should have just stayed in always and forced their energy, but unfortunately, I didn't, and I almost threw that game. We see a bad lead in the next match, leading Fortress into Quagsire. I save switch into Furret, and my opponent is going to respond with Guzzlord, and this is another reason why Brick Break is so nice on Furret, because I just very cleanly win the zeros into the Guzzlord. Brick Break debuff is applied, suddenly the Sucker Punches are doing a lot of damage as well, the Brutal Swing lands, and I don't even have to go for a Brick Break here, I can just settle for the Swift. If my opponent wants switch advantage, I'm more than happy to give it to them, because I know the only shielding scenario that Furret is going to win is going to be the zeros. So I let Furret go, and now I just try and absorb energy on the Fortress. I would much rather take the damage here than on the Annihilate, because the Fortress doesn't really have a lot of value considering their leader's Quagsire. So they fire off a Brutal Swing, they're going for another Brutal Swing, and I'm just going to bank this energy and snipe them down with the Annihilate. So I send in Annihilate, counters take the knockout. Alright, what do they have in the back? They have a Feraligatr, and this is looking pretty good. I should be able to get a lot of boosted counter damage into that Quagsire, and that should hopefully put it in a range where I can knock them out with the Fortress energy. My opponent will fire off a charge attack with Feraligatr. I'm going to put up the shield, because I'm now guaranteed to make the Rage Fist. So I click Rage Fist, and I lose charge attack priority. My opponent's running a very attack-weighted Feraligatr. This would never happen if I was running my attack-weighted Annihilate, but because I'm running a bulk-weighted Annihilate, it turns out that I actually can lose that charge attack priority tie. In comes Quagsire, they get the Mud Shot down, I send in the Fortress. I think I got one turn bringing there, but either way, they can just knock me out with the Stone Edge. So unfortunately, losing that charge attack priority tie ended up losing me the game. We see at this point a pretty familiar lead matchup by now, leading Fortress into Carbink. There is a lot of Carbink out there in the Go Battle League right now, and this team is ABA strong to it. You can debuff them with Sand Tombs, Annihilate destroys Carbink, so across the board there are some pretty nice options available. Unfortunately, they're highly likely just to bank it and end up save switching out, and that's exactly what they're going to do. They end up save switching into the Shadow Primate. The good news for me is I'm just outside of Rage Fist range, so as they go for the Rage Fist, I know that I will be able to hang on and just spam out another Sand Tomb. Sand Tomb applies debuff after debuff onto my opponent, and now I can send in the Shadow Annihilate and go for a one shield farm down. Carbink has a ton of energy on it, but the good news for me is that Carbink is notoriously very slow to get to charge attacks. So if they bring back in the Carbink, I feel very comfortable just firing off my Rage Fist and shielding. Because if they ever throw a Moonblast is so expensive on Carbink that they're just never going to make it to another charge attack for the remainder of the game. Moonblast will be shielded up by the Carbink. In the back is Galarian Moltres, and look at the Shadow Annihilate counters go. I farm up to the Ice Punch, I bait with the Rage Fist. They can never afford to call this bait. Galarian Moltres desperately trying to farm down, and they're just simply not going to be able to do so. Shadow Annihilate, it's so back. We counter down everything. All they have left is shreds of Carbink. In comes Furret, and my opponent resigns the match. Hopping into the final match, and we pick up a very nice lead Fortress into Florges. I believe this is one of the Florgeses that ends up staying in and fully playing out the matchup, so you can kind of see how it goes. Florges is typically paired with water types, and that means anytime they queue into Volt Switch Fortress, they're core broken to smithereens, and the Florges is forced to stay in and soft lose the matchup. In the meantime, I'm able to get really consistent fast move pressure with the Volt Switches, and the Rock Tombs, even as they do progressively less and less damage, will still add up quite a bit over time. I spam out the next Rock Tomb. I know this will not take the knockout, but the goal is I want to try and exit the matchup with energy, and potentially I'm even going to be sniping down this Florges, so that way I can save a charge attack. Chilling Water is going to land, getting me very low. I realize that they just survived the final Volt Switch, so instead of firing off the Sand Tomb, I end up sniping with Furret. Now, Furret is going to be met with Guzzlord, so the alignment not necessarily ideal. I would much rather have this on the Annihilate, but even still with Brick Break, I should be able to generate a shield advantage. Brick Break into the Guzzlord will be hitting for super effective damage. Guzzlord is going to no shield, and now I'm on track to make it to the Swift. And Swift would normally not be a problem, but with that defense drop, they're going to have to respect it. Guzzlord should be able to overfarm quite a bit. I did debate catching this move onto the Fortress, but figured that the charge attack that's loaded on the Fortress is just simply too valuable. So now we get a counter head start on Annihilate, but Disaster strikes as it's Jellicent in the back. However, because I have a Shadow Annihilate that's up energy, up a shield, and I have a Rock Tomb banked on my Fortress, I think I'm actually going to be okay. They have to no-shield the first Rage Fist because the next one would do more, but that does so much damage onto the Jellicent. Now I can make it to a second Rage Fist, pressuring the final shield, and then go for the combination play with the Rock Tomb. So Jellicent has to give up that final shield. Now they're going to get hit with the Rock Tomb. Will this be enough damage? Rock Tomb does not take the knockout. Guzzlord dies to the Volt Switch, and back in comes the Jellicent. Now, I have to do the impossible, counter down a Ghost type. It looks like the opponent did get damage registration error there, so they make the last second Surf, but the counter damage register is taking the knockout, and even with a Jellicent aligned onto our Annihilate endgame, we're able to claw our way back and get the win. All in all, I had so much fun getting to run this team. I intentionally kept this team a secret for a few days this week because I realized how strong it was, and I knew that this was going to be the Legend team. And this team, after I ended up falling to about 2750 after trying a wide variety of different things, including Skeledirge, I realized this was going to be the Legend team. So I ended up grinding this team, really learning the matchups, trying to figure out how I wanted to play different lead scenarios, different save swaps, etc. And it really ended up paying off. I think this team is very strong. This team does disrespect Gourgeist and Talonflame. So if people start running a ton of Gourgeist and Talonflame, this team would not be as strong as it would be. And I do recognize that by publicizing this team, this may incentivize people to run Pokemon like Gourgeist and Talonflame. I think Gourgeist is a lot better than Talonflame right now, but both of them do have their issues just because it's a very water-heavy meta. There's so much water out there that it makes Pokemon like Gourgeist, even as a grass type, with the amount of Feraligatr that's out there, Feraligatr kind of dominates that Gourgeist matchup, so it's very uncomfortable for the Gourgeist, and obviously Talonflame hates any water type that it encounters. So I do think in general, fire types could pick up once this video does get published and make this team less strong than it was, but oh my goodness, this team was cutting through the meta with a scythe. And I think the results speak for themselves. Very early Legend and number 6 in the entire world on the Go Battle League leaderboards. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not. And an extra special thank you, as always, to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. I hope you enjoyed the much longer upload today. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.